Port Blossom was a city that chewed people up and spit them out, and in its grimy corners, 7 young souls were just trying to survive. First, there was Leo, a kid who could fix anything with his hands, but couldn't fix his own broken family. He ran away from a foster system that felt more like a cage, his pockets empty but his head full of blueprints and dreams of a better life. Then there was Maya, a girl as sharp as a shard of glass. She grew up on the streets, learning to read people's faces like a book, because trusting the wrong person could mean not eating for a week. Her heart was guarded by walls of sarcasm and a quick temper, a fortress she built to protect the lonely girl inside. Next came Sam, a gentle giant who looked intimidating but wouldn't hurt a fly. He was an outcast from a wealthy family that disowned him for not being ruthless enough for their corporate world. He worked the docks, his immense strength used for hauling crates, but his real strength was his unwavering kindness, a quality that the city seemed determined to crush. Then you had Alara, a girl who saw things others didn't. She came from a long line of storytellers and mystics, but in the concrete jungle of Port Blossom, her visions were dismissed as madness. She was haunted by glimpses of the future, a burden that made her quiet and withdrawn, forever watching from the shadows. There was also Kai, a daredevil with a grin that could charm a snake but hid a deep well of pain. His parents were famous explorers who vanished at sea, leaving him with a legacy of adventure and an aching void in his heart. He pulled reckless stunts for money, chasing the same adrenaline that he imagined his parents had, hoping it would somehow bring him closer to them. Then, there was Zara, a brilliant mind trapped by circumstance. She was a self-taught coder and strategist who had to drop out of school to care for her sick grandmother. She felt like a bird with clipped wings, her potential wasted on petty scams to pay for medicine, her anger a slow-burning fire. Finally, there was Ben, the youngest of the bunch. He was a runaway, a shadow who could move through the city unseen. He never spoke about his past, but the fear in his eyes told a story of its own. He was a master of stealth and survival, stealing just enough to get by, his loneliness a constant companion. These 7 were like puzzle pieces from different boxes, all sharp edges and missing parts. They moved through the same desperate streets of Port Blossom, unaware that their paths were on a collision course, destined to clash before they could ever hope to connect. Each one was a hero in waiting, but first, they had to survive each other. Their first meeting wasn't a friendly one. It was over a stolen crate of medical supplies, a prize that Leo wanted for parts, Maya wanted to sell, and Zara needed for her grandmother. The argument quickly turned into a chase through the labyrinthine alleys of the port. Sam tried to break it up. Kai tripped Leo just for the fun of it, and Alara watched from a rooftop, a terrible vision of sirens flashing in her mind. Ben, unseen, had already slipped a few supplies from the crate while the others were distracted. The chaos was a perfect storm of desperation and mistrust, each person seeing the others as just another obstacle in a long line of them. They weren't friends. They were rivals, enemies born from the same struggle. The shouting and shoving attracted the wrong kind of attention. The piercing wail of police sirens cut through the air, and suddenly, their individual problems became one big, shared one. The police in Port Blossom weren't known for asking questions first. Getting caught meant disappearing into a system that had already failed most of them. Panic set in. Zara, with her strategic mind, was the first to see the only way out. She pointed toward the docks, toward a rickety, half-repaired fishing boat bobbing in the murky water. "There," she yelled. "It's our only chance." Leo was furious. His escape plan, his dream, was about to be hijacked by a group of strangers he couldn't stand. But with the police closing in, he had no choice. "Fine, but I'm the captain," he barked, leading the charge. They scrambled aboard the vessel, a mismatched collection of fugitives. Maya, using her nimble fingers, untied the thick ropes with lightning speed. Sam used his strength to push the boat away from the dock, its old wood groaning in protest. Kai, ever the daredevil, climbed the mast to act as a lookout, a wild grin on his face despite the danger. Alara just held on, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and a strange sense of destiny. As they chugged out of the harbor, leaving the flashing lights of Port Blossom behind, The tension on the small boat was thicker than the fog rolling in from the sea. They were a crew of enemies, forced together by a common threat. They didn't trust each other. They didn't even like each other. Leo tinkered with the engine, muttering under his breath. Maya kept a suspicious eye on everyone, her hand never far from the knife she kept hidden. Sam tried to offer words of peace, but they were lost in the roar of the engine and the growing sound of an approaching storm. They had escaped the law, but they were sailing directly into a much older, much more mysterious danger. The relief of their escape was short-lived. The sky, once a canvas of dusky purple, turned a bruised, angry black. The sea, their path to freedom, began to churn and boil. A storm was upon them, but it felt like no ordinary storm. The wind howled with voices that seemed to whisper their names, and the waves crashed against their small boat like angry fists. Alara clutched her head, the whispers in the wind matching the chaotic visions in her mind. She saw strange shapes in the water and impossible geometries in the clouds. "This is no normal storm," she murmured, her voice trembling. "We're going somewhere we shouldn't be." Kai, who had spent his life reading about the sea, recognized the signs. The compass was spinning wildly, the electronics on board were flickering and dying, and a strange green fog was rolling in, thick and suffocating. "The Bermuda Triangle," he breathed, a mix of terror and awe in his voice. "The legendary graveyard of ships and planes." The stories his parents used to tell him were coming to life, but this was no bedtime tale. This was real. Leo fought with the useless wheel, the boat completely at the mercy of the monstrous waves. Zara frantically tried to get a signal on her dead radio, her logical mind struggling to comprehend the illogical chaos around them. The storm was a living thing, a predator playing with its food. A colossal wave, a moving mountain of water, rose before them. It blotted out the sky, its peak crowned with eerie green lightning. There was a moment of absolute silence as they stared up at their impending doom. In that second, their animosity was washed away by a shared primal fear. Sam grabbed Ben, shielding the smaller boy with his own body. Maya and Leo, who had been arguing moments before, now stood side by side, bracing for impact. For the first time, they weren't seven strangers. They were a crew, facing the end together. The wave crashed down, and the world dissolved into a fury of water and noise. The boat was tossed and turned, splintering under the immense pressure. They were thrown into the churning, unnaturally warm water. Their last sensation was of being pulled down, not just by the weight of the water, but by an unseen current that dragged them into the deep, dark heart of the triangle. They lost consciousness, drifting in the green-tinged darkness, their desperate escape from Port Blossom, leading them into a prison far stranger and more terrifying than any they could have imagined. They were lost, consumed by the myth. They woke up sputtering on a beach of fine black sand. The sky above was a perpetual twilight, lit by two moons, one silver and one a sickly green. Before them stretched a jungle unlike any they had ever seen. The plants were a riot of bioluminescent colors, pulsing with a soft internal light. The air was thick with the scent of unknown blossoms and damp earth, and it hummed with a low, rhythmic thrumming sound, like a giant, sleeping heart. Maya was the first to her feet, her survival instincts kicking in. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice raspy. No one had an answer. The wreckage of their boat was nowhere in sight. As they explored the edge of the jungle, they realized the island was alive. The ground beneath their feet felt soft and fleshy, and the rhythmic thrumming seemed to come from below them. Leo touched a large, pulsating vine, and it recoiled from his hand with a soft hiss. The trees had bark that resembled scales, and their branches moved slowly, as if breathing. Alara felt it most strongly. "The island, it's watching us," she whispered, her eyes wide. "It feels everything. It's ancient and aware." They were not shipwrecked on a piece of land. They were trespassing on a colossal, living creature. Their awe quickly turned to terror. From the depths of the glowing jungle, figures emerged. They were tall and slender, with skin like polished obsidian and limbs that moved with an unsettling, insect-like grace. They had no faces, only smooth, blank surfaces that seemed to absorb the light. These alien beings surrounded the seven survivors, their silence more menacing than any threat. Sam moved to stand in front of the others, his large frame a protective barrier, but the creatures showed no aggression. They simply herded them, their movements precise and coordinated, guiding them deeper into the alien forest. Resistance was futile. The creatures were strong and impossibly fast. They separated the group, splitting them into smaller, more manageable units. Leo, Zara, and Ben were led in one direction, while Maya and Sam were taken in another. Kai and Alara were pulled away down a third path. They shouted to each other, their voices swallowed by the dense, living jungle. Panic and fear, the very emotions that had bound them together, were now being used to tear them apart. A new, more intelligent presence made itself known, a cold, dark consciousness that seemed to be directing the creatures, a force that was eager to learn what they were most afraid of. Separated and terrified, each of them was forced to confront the deepest pains they had carried from their old lives. The dark force that ruled the island was a psychic predator, and it began to feed on their fears, creating these vivid, waking nightmares. Leo found himself in an endless workshop filled with broken machines. An illusion of his foster father appeared, his voice booming with disapproval. "You'll never fix anything, Leo. You can't even fix yourself. You are broken, just like everything you touch." Leo frantically tried to assemble a complex engine, but the parts kept changing shape, mocking his skills and amplifying his deepest insecurity, the fear that he was worthless and unfixable. Maya and Sam were trapped together in a shifting labyrinth that mirrored the treacherous streets of Port Blossom. For Sam, the walls were lined with the sneering faces of his family, their voices dripping with disappointment. "You are weak, Samuel. Kindness is a flaw. You will always be alone." He was forced to relive the moment of his disownment over and over. For Maya, the maze was filled with phantoms of people she had failed to trust and those who had betrayed her. She saw herself as a young, starving child, alone and vulnerable. The illusion preyed on her fear of letting her guard down, whispering that trusting Sam, or anyone, would only lead to more pain and abandonment. Kai and Alara were plunged into a disorienting, watery abyss. Kai was forced to watch a ghostly image of his parents' ship, the Wanderer, sink again and again, just out of his reach. He heard their desperate calls, their voices twisted by the dark entity. "You let us go, son. You weren't there." His adventurous spirit was turned against him, the illusion insisting his quest for adrenaline was just a selfish way of running from his grief and guilt. Alara, meanwhile, was overwhelmed by a torrent of horrifying visions. She saw her friends suffering, the island feeding on them, and a future where the darkness consumed everything. Her gift became a curse, paralyzing her with prophecies of failure and despair. In his own solitary nightmare, Ben was trapped in a small, dark room, the walls closing in. The space was filled with the faint, echoing cries of a family he couldn't remember, but could desperately feel. The darkness whispered that he was forgotten, that he had been abandoned because he was silent and worthless, a ghost that nobody would ever miss. Zara, in her prison, faced an illusion of her grandmother, frail and sick in bed. The phantom accused her, "Your brilliant mind did nothing. You failed me, Zaria." She was surrounded by impossible equations and unsolvable puzzles, reinforcing her greatest fear, that for all her intelligence, she was ultimately powerless to save the people she loved. The island was dissecting them, one fear at a time. The dark force made a critical mistake. By showing them their greatest fears, it also reminded them of their greatest strengths. In his workshop of despair, Leo looked at his hands. He remembered every engine he had ever fixed, every gadget he had ever built. The Phantom's voice was a lie. He wasn't broken, he was a builder. He ignored the shifting parts and focused on a single, simple gear. He began to work, not to fix the impossible engine, but to make something real, something of his own. He forged a small, intricate lockpick, his focus a shield against the illusion. With a click, he unlocked the door to his mental prison and stepped out, determined to find his friends. In the maze, Sam saw Maya trembling, lost in her own nightmare. The taunts of his family echoed around him, but the sight of her pain was stronger. He remembered that his kindness wasn't a weakness, it was his greatest strength. He walked over to Maya and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maya, it's not real," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here. You're not alone." His simple, genuine act of compassion shattered the illusion. The sneering faces of his family vanished, and the phantoms haunting Maya dissolved into smoke. She looked up at him, her tough exterior cracking to reveal a flicker of trust. Together, they found their way out of the maze. Alara was drowning in her visions of doom when she heard Kai shouting. He wasn't crying out in despair, he was yelling in defiance. "You can show me this 1,000 times. It won't change a thing. I love them and I miss them." His voice, filled with raw, honest grief, cut through her paralysis. She realized her visions weren't a curse, but a tool. She could choose what to focus on. Instead of the darkness, she looked for a glimmer of light, a vision of hope. She saw a path, a faint thread of possibility leading out of the abyss. "Kai," she called out, "this way. I see a way out." Together, they followed her vision, turning their burdens into weapons. Leo, having freed himself, found Zara first, who was still trapped in her cycle of failure. He didn't offer empty words of encouragement. He simply handed her the lockpick he had made. "You're the strategist, Zara. Get us out of here," he said, his voice filled with a respect he hadn't shown before. Seeing the intricate device, a problem with a real solution, cleared Zara's mind. Her intellect sparked back to life. She quickly devised a plan, and together they freed Ben. Soon, all 7 were reunited in a cavern deep within the island. They were bruised and shaken, but they were different. They had faced their demons and chosen to fight back. They were no longer enemies or strangers. They were a team. Zara's plan was bold. The Dark Force was a psychic entity, a parasite that lived in a central chamber, the heart of the island. It drew its power from the fear it harvested. "If we can get to the heart," she explained, her voice confident, "we can't fight it with our fists. We have to fight it with our minds. We have to stop being afraid." Alara used her visions to guide them through the living island's pulsating veins, while Ben's stealth skills allowed them to move past the blank-faced alien guardians undetected. Sam and Maya worked together to clear obstacles, and Kai's reckless bravery kept their spirits up, turning the terrifying journey into a grand adventure. They reached a vast cavern. In the center floated a swirling vortex of black and purple energy, the Dark Force. It had no physical form, but its presence was a crushing weight of pure terror. As they entered, the entity lashed out, plunging them back into their personal nightmares. But this time, it was different. They were together. When the illusion of Leo's foster father appeared, Zara stood beside him, pointing out the flaws in its logic. When Kai saw his parents' ship sink, Alara placed a hand on his arm and showed him a vision of their pride and love for him, not their demise. They were anchoring each other in reality. The Dark Force grew desperate. It couldn't feed on their individual fears anymore, so it created a monstrous amalgamation of all of them. A shadowy beast with Leo's broken gears, Maya's mistrustful eyes, and Sam's loneliness. The creature roared, a sound made of all their insecurities. But the 7 stood their ground. Leo started shouting out engineering facts, Sam recited poetry, and Maya told a funny story from her time on the streets. They flooded the psychic space with courage, with logic, with humor, with hope. They weren't just refusing to be afraid, they were actively projecting their strengths into the void. The vortex began to destabilize, shrieking as it was starved of its food source. In a final, desperate act, it exploded outward, causing the cavern to collapse. "Go! Now!" Leo yelled. They ran, the island groaning and shaking around them as its heart died. A chasm opened up, separating them. On one side were Kai and Alara, near an exit leading to the sea. On the other side were Leo, Maya, Sam, Zara, and Ben, trapped by falling rock. "Go!" Maya shouted across the growing gap. "Tell them what happened. Come back for us." With a final pained look, Kai and Alara scrambled through the opening and dove into the ocean, just as the cavern sealed behind them. Kai and Alara washed up on the shores of Florida, thousands of miles from Port Blossom. They were found by the Coast Guard, dehydrated and exhausted, their minds reeling from what they had endured. Their story was frantic, a jumble of living islands, faceless aliens, and psychic monsters. They spoke of their 5 friends, trapped and waiting for rescue. They pleaded, they begged. They showed the strange, faint scars left by the island's flora. But the authorities saw only 2 traumatized teenagers spinning a wild, unbelievable tale. They were met with pity, skepticism, and dismissive pats on the back. A bad storm can play tricks on the mind, one officer told them gently. They were sent to counselors and doctors who tried to explain away their experience as a shared delusion, a trauma response to being lost at sea. Every door they knocked on was closed in their faces. The world they had fought so hard to return to refused to believe them. The frustration was immense. It felt like a second prison. Alara's visions, once a guide, were now dismissed as hallucinations. Kai's passionate retelling of their adventure was seen as the ravings of a troubled youth. They were as lost and alone in civilization as they had been on the island. The world of logic and reason had no room for a story as fantastic as theirs. But their disbelief did not break them. It forged their resolve into steel. They had faced down their deepest fears. They would not be defeated by skepticism. "They don't have to believe us," Kai said one evening, looking out at the ocean. "We believe. We know they're alive." Alara nodded, her gaze distant but firm. And Maya was right. We have to go back for them. Their promise to their friends became their new purpose, a mission that gave them strength. They were no longer just survivors. They were the keepers of a story, the only two people in the world who knew the truth. They began to prepare. They took odd jobs, saving every penny. Kai used his charm and daring to acquire maps of the triangle, studying currents and forgotten maritime logs. Alara honed her visions, learning to focus them, searching for glimpses of their friends in the island. She saw them not as prisoners, but as guardians, fighting a remnant of the darkness. This vision gave them hope. They weren't just planning a rescue, they were rejoining a battle. The world may have forgotten the lost, but Kai and Alara would never. They would sail back into the heart of the myth, armed with a story that only they knew was true. Back on the island, the remaining 5 did not wait passively. The death of the main entity had left a power vacuum, and a fragment of its darkness lingered, a weaker but still dangerous echo. Leo, Maya, Sam, Zara, and Ben became the island's reluctant guardians. They learned to live in harmony with the strange, living ecosystem. Leo discovered how to communicate with the island through vibrations, helping to soothe it. Sam's kindness calmed the alien creatures, who were now lost without their master. They became allies, no longer faceless monsters, but a lost species themselves. Maya, Zara, and Ben became a formidable team, mapping the island and tracking the lingering shadow. Their final confrontation with the darkness came in the ruins of the Heart Chamber. The shadow had coalesced into a single, cunning creature of pure fear. But the 5 were no longer the broken individuals who had washed ashore. They fought as a unit, a family forged in fire. Sam protected the group, his strength now a shield of courage. Zara directed their attacks, her strategic mind predicting the creature's moves. Maya and Ben used their agility and stealth to flank it, while Leo used his knowledge of the island to trap it, causing the very ground to ensnare the beast. They didn't destroy it with violence, but with unity, cornering it until its own fear consumed it, and it dissolved into nothing. Just as the last wisp of darkness faded, a sound echoed from the coast, a boat horn. Kai and Alara had returned. They had found a grizzled old sailor who, for a hefty price and a love of impossible stories, agreed to take them. The reunion on the black sand beach was a moment of pure joy. Tears were shed and hugs were exchanged. The 7 were whole again. The journey home was different. They were no longer running. They were returning, changed. They arrived not in Port Blossom, but in a small, quiet town where they could start over. Their story, once dismissed, began to spread. Not through official channels, but through whispers, through stories told around campfires and in late-night diners. It became a modern legend, the tale of the lost pirates of the Bermuda Triangle. The 7, once outcasts, became symbols of hope. They proved that even the most broken people could face their demons and emerge as heroes. They showed that unity was a force stronger than fear, and that some stories, no matter how unbelievable, hold a power all their own. They were lost, but in finding each other, they found their way home, leaving a legacy that would inspire others to believe in the impossible.